Hello, in today's video I will be showing you how to push back the aircraft and taxi the runway so you're ready for takeoff. In the last two episodes I went over how to create a flight plan and how to start up the airplane and get your IFR clearance. So we have the airplane all started up, we have our clearance. Now what we need to do is request pushback from ATC and get on the move. After that, we're going to have to start up our engines and then taxi and hold short of the runway that we are going to take off at. So let's get right into it. Go ahead. The first thing we're going to need to do to set up the pushback is go to the ATC panel, and we're going to have to go to ground services and request pushback. So you can go to do that right here. So we'll request pushback, and our co-pilot will send a request to San Francisco ground, and our pushback request has been accepted. So we'll close that menu and head to the outside of the aircraft, and we'll see that we have a tug lining up with the nose gear ready to push us back. The one thing that we're going to need to do is release the parking brake since we have that set. So go down here to the parking brake and just click on it, and now it is set to off. So now the pushback tug can successfully push us back. If you have the parking brake on, you will barely push back and it will take a very long time, so make sure to turn the parking brake off. The tug is now pushing us back, so one thing to keep note of is that back here is the safety line. You got to get behind that before you can stop, push back, and start up your engines. Another thing is you can request pushback to steer to the left or right. So if I go to this view, if I request pushback to steer to the right, it will go this way. If I request it to push back to the left, it will go this way. Over here is runway 1 left, which earlier is the runway I was assigned to take off on according to my IFR clearance in the last episode. So I'm going to set it to the right so that I can turn this way, start up my engines, and I will be ready to taxi right along and hold short of runway 1 left. In a sector or two here, I will request it to steer to the right, so I will line up with that taxiway. And we're nearing the safety line here, so we will stop it pretty soon. So now we'll request pushback to steer to the right now that we're passing it. So click on that. My request has been transmitted to the operator, so now it will be turning right. And now once you're turning a certain direction, you can request pushback to push straight, which I will do in a second here. I'll request pushback to push straight now so that I go backwards and onto the taxiway line. There we go. Now once I get over to the taxiway, I will start up my engines. While waiting for the pushback to finish, we will go over to this checklist, and we have completed this checklist, so we'll go over to the starting engine checklist and we'll prepare our engines for startup once pushback has been completed. I think we're good on pushback, so we'll request pushback to stop as we're in a good position here on the taxiway. And they did receive my request and pushback, so that is good. We'll head back into the cockpit, and first thing we need to make sure is that the thrust levels are at idle, which means they're at 0% thrust or creating no power. Because if you start up the engines and they're at full throttle, well, that won't be good. So you got to make sure that thrust levels are idle, and judging by this, they are idle as I bring them back down to 0. So we'll tick this item off. Next, we need to switch the engine mode selector to IGN/start. The engine selector is down here, and I just flicked it to IGN start, but it's normally at mode normal. So we'll tick that item off. Next, what we need to do is turn engine master 2 on. We'll check that off. So that's starting up engine number 2. And then next, we'll turn on engine master number 1. So we'll tick that off, and that makes it so it starts up engine number 1. And what we can do here is go over to this little engine panel, and you can see that some numbers are going up, which means that the engines are starting up. And then also that fuel will start to be used. So that's something that you'll notice. So we have to wait for the engines to be stabilized, which will take about 15, 20, 30 seconds here. So the engines are ramping up and fuel is starting to be used, so the engines are starting up, but they're not stabilized yet, so we have to wait for that. At the moment, I have rudder pedals plugged in, and we're gonna need rudder control to control the airplane here. So I'm just gonna do a quick test of the rudder pedals, and looking down here, they are working. So when we are taxiing, you need some sort of rudder control. It might not be pedals, but you need something on your keyboard, on your yoke, that allows you to control the airplane on the ground, or else you will not be able to turn and twist on the ground, which is something that's crucial. Looks like the engines are stabilized, so we'll tick that item off, and we have completed the starting engine checklist. Now we have to go to the after starting engine checklist. We have to turn off APU bleed, which that's right there, so we'll turn that off, and we'll tick that item off. Next, we have to turn off the APU master switch, and that's right there. We'll turn that off, and we'll tick that off. Lastly, we have to put the engine mode selector back to normal, so we'll switch it back to normal, and then tick that item off, and we have completed the after starting engine checklist. And now we are ready for taxi, so we will request our taxi. Go back to clearance, and click Request Taxi IFR. So my co-pilot is sending a request to ground. I'm United 1, and we are getting a taxi clearance. And they are telling us to taxi to runway 1 left via Alpha Hotel Bravo Mike, and to contact tower when ready, which basically means hold short. So we'll acknowledge the taxi clearance and read it back. Going outside of the airplane, you can see that there's this taxi ribbon of arrows in the direction we need to go. Basically, when you read back the clearance, this taxi ribbon will show up and show you the direction you need to go, but first off, you need to set this up in the settings and turn this on. If you want this setting on and need some help with your taxis like I do, go to the assistance options and go to navigation aids and turn taxi ribbon on. That's how you turn on those arrows for taxi on, and it's very helpful. I'd recommend turning it on unless you're a very experienced pilot. So go back to here, and we read back our taxi, so we're ready for taxi. So we'll throttle up the engines and use our rudders to control the airplane and taxi over to the runway. I'll get a little bit higher. I'll put myself up in the booster seat. And we're gonna watch our speed there. We've got a ground speed of about 16, 17 knots. What you need to do is stay below about 20, I would say. Stay below 20-ish. You wanna stay, I'd say about 15 to 20. If you go above 20, there will be like a little pop-up in-game that tells you to slow down. So 20 is probably the maximum speed. Using our rudders to follow along. And it looks like the runway is just right there. I'm gonna brake a little bit just to slow it down since we're nearing the runway. And there's a hold short line, so we need to hold short of that. We cannot go past that without clearance. So we're gonna line up with that, and we're gonna brake. Now what we need to do is request our takeoff clearance. So this concludes the Pushback and Taxi episode. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good day.